Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Acer Chromebook Tab 10, which is the first Chrome OS device that ships as a tablet. Just a tablet, standalone tablet, does not come with a keyboard, not a detachable keyboard, not a one that's built into the device. So it's not designed to be used as a laptop. Instead, it's to be used with your fingers or with a stylus, which is slotted here into the device. And you can see pulling out that stylus turns it on and opens stylus menu that gives you capture region, capture screen, create node, and a couple of other options. It can be used with a Bluetooth keyboard or a USB keyboard if you really wanted to, but it is first and foremost a tablet. And while this particular model is designed for the education market, I really wanted to review it because I think it gives us an idea of what to expect from Chrome OS tablets in the future. And with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about how it can be used for education purposes, but also sort of what it means for Chrome OS as a tablet operating system. I'm also running this on developer channel software, something I don't necessarily expect students and educators to do. But the reason I am running the developer version of Chrome OS 69 is because we get this nice touchscreen friendly quick settings panel and access for Linux, or the ability to run Linux applications out of the box with Chrome 67, which is what this ships with as of July 2018. You get access to the Chrome web browser and support for the Google Play Store. But if you switch to developer channel, you can also run Linux applications. So let's take a quick look around the sides here. I'll tell you a little bit about the design. It's got a sort of ridged blue plastic back. As I mentioned, the stylus fits right into the case here. On the bottom, we've got a speaker. There's stereo speakers, one here and one on the other side, and a USB Type-C port. Just label information over here. Micro SD card slot, and power and volume buttons, second speaker, and the headset jack. There are front and rear cameras. They're pretty lousy. I wouldn't really recommend using them for anything if you can avoid it. The device sells for about $329 to education customers. You might be able to find them in a couple of retail channels as well, but again, it's really designed first and foremost for the education market, and that's all Acer is really targeting it towards. Has a Rockchip OP1 processor, similar to the Rockchip RK3399 processor. It's a 6-core ARM-based chip. 4 gigs of RAM, 32 gigabytes of storage, and a 9.7-inch 2048 by 1536 pixel display, similar to what you would find on an iPad. Overall, it's 1.15 pounds, pretty easy to hold, and the display is definitely one of the strong suits. The processor, in terms of performance, and you can find some benchmark information and other details at Liliputing, it's fine for single tasking. It's not the fastest you're going to find, but if you just wanted to use it for basic web browsing, you probably wouldn't necessarily notice that it's significantly slower than any other processor. We can open up a couple of tabs here. That's not what I meant to do, though. And let's play a video. We'll talk more about the keyboard in a second.
Hotels.com are giving venture card holders 10 miles on every dollar they spend at thousands of hotels.
Now, it might be possible that you can minimize the fan noise using speed fan. Viewing angles are pretty good. But this is just on the default settings, so here we go. And video playback works nicely. I've used it for Netflix, I've used it for YouTube, I've used it for Plex. I've watched a full video on it. It gets around 9 hours of battery life, 9 to 10 hours of battery life, give or take, depending on what it is that you're using it for. If you install Linux apps and do a lot of multitasking, it'll probably get less time. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend that because the system can get a little bit bogged down if you do too much heavy multitasking. One thing that you'll notice here is there's a X button and a minimize button in the upper right-hand corner, but there is no resize button. Everything that runs on here runs in full screen mode. There's no option to resize freeform windows and just move them around the way that there is on a normal Chromebook. That's one of the things that makes this sort of tablet specific. Another is that you've got this little back button down here on most screens. It's sort of a little bit more like a cross between Android and Chrome OS in some ways. Now there is a multitasking button here, and there is support for multiple windows of Chrome. So let's open a second one here and say open the New York Times website. And if you wanted to do split screen, you can do that. You just don't get to resize and tile and do everything else around your windows. So I can switch between these two by long pressing and or by short pressing and then choosing which one, or I can drag to the side and tap. Now you notice it doesn't resize perfectly here, so let's go ahead and reload that page. And then I can read an article here, and I can say watch a video here, and so forth. This works not just for browser windows, but for all sorts of different applications. So if I wanted to open the Google Play Store, I could open that in half the screen. If I wanted to open the Washington Post app, I could open that in half the screen. And I could also resize it to some degree. Not all apps support resizing, but some do. And that's one that I knew would work. And not all applications necessarily run in split screen mode either. Sometimes they'll just want to take up the whole screen. Now we can flip back to full screen here pretty easily just by dragging it over. So that's a little bit of sort of multitasking, split screen, and I'll show you there's a couple of different ways to close applications in Windows. So here we can click the little X button. Here we can press and hold to say close, or we can go to the multitasking view and click the X. So closing applications, you have a couple of different options there. Now it's a stylus device, and so I think some things that they might want to do here involve using that stylus. So let's go ahead and switch back to portrait mode, pull out the stylus, and say we want to create a note. Now this will open your default note-taking app. In this case, it's Google Keep, which is behaving a little bit weird there. Not really sure what's going on there. You can change it to others. I noticed, I think Squid is one that you can use instead. And you can do handwritten notes or typed notes. Now using the on-screen keyboard here, as I mentioned, it's sort of an Android-style on-screen keyboard. One thing that's kind of interesting is that it covers up the bottom. So if you were using an Android device, you'd still have access to your home, back, and recents buttons. Here it covers up all of your navigation buttons. So I want to type, and I'd have to minimize it if I wanted to switch applications now. I can use this to type, and I can use gesture typing as well. Although it's a little bit tricky with this camera angle, so typing isn't working. Or I could switch to input with a pen, but this is a little bit weird because you'll notice it doesn't automatically type that in. I need to choose input with a pen. So it's kind of a slow way to enter text. It's not necessarily something I would recommend doing. What I think is more useful is if you wanted to do pictures or actual handwritten notes. And there's a couple of neat things that you can do. For instance, Google's Quick Draw web app. This just runs in a website. You could use your fingers, but it's a little bit easier with the pen. It says, let's draw a teddy bear. So
I see blueberry. Oh, I know. It's teddy bear.
I'm not entirely sure I can draw a scorpion.
I see hockey puck. Or blueberry. Or mouse. Or eyeglasses. I see crab. Or ant. Or sun. Or spider. Or snorkel.
Let's just go ahead. Draw a beard. Okay, that should be a little bit easier.
I see circle. Or planet. Or potato. Or face. Or smiley face. Oh, I know. It's beard. I see circle. Or blueberry. Or lollipop. Or fork. I see balloon.
That's
Oh, I
pretty
know.
crappy.
It's fan.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Anyway, so using the pen, you can sort of go through games like this. There's also Google's Auto Draw, something else that's kind of fun to play with. In this case, it already had the last thing I drew. Start over. I'm going to draw the same thing again because I don't have a lot of things that I can draw. And it'll make my picture pretty. So the stylus works reasonably well. It's pressure sensitive, but not all applications are necessarily going to recognize the pressure sensitivity. Palm rejection is a little bit finicky. Some apps seem to work better than others with it. My handwriting and my drawing abilities are not necessarily top-notch, as you can tell, so it's something I haven't spent too much time playing with. But you can use this device in a lot of different ways. So you can use it for those applications that I just showed you. You can use it for reading. So here, for instance, is an Attack on Titan manga. And I think, weighing about a pound, a little less than 1.2 pounds, it works pretty well for reading large amounts of text. I don't know that there's a lot of call for doing that in an education setting. It works with Google Classroom. It works with sort of fleet management IT tools that administrators might want. And I think part of what is interesting about Chromebooks in general for education customers is that they're relatively easy to manage, they're relatively easy to reset if anything goes wrong. You just log in on any one and you have access to all of the apps and features associated with that account. That becomes a little bit less true if you start doing sort of power user things like I did, which involves installing Linux and using the terminal application. Now, I have a whole separate video that goes into more details about this, but essentially one of the reasons that I switched to the developer channel and I'm running Chrome 69 on this device is that I get this more user-friendly, touch-friendly navigation area over here, and also that we have access to Chrome Terminal, which is behaving a little bit weird right now. So I'm going to go ahead and close that and try to launch it again. There we go. So I can do a LSB release a command, and it'll show you that essentially what I'm running here is a version of Debian 9.4 Stretch Linux. You have access to those tools, and you can install applications using the sudo. So I've got GIMP installed here, I've got LibreOffice, I've got a note-taking application here called Journal. And generally speaking, things work pretty well, again, with the caveat that you're going to have the best results, I think, if you do a lot of single tasking. When you do too much multitasking, things can get a little bit tricky, and overall performance can lag, and the device can lock up. Now I'm running beta channel software, something I don't expect a lot of education customers to do, but it's so you're going to get a little bit better stability if you don't do that. A few other things that I wanted to note here is that it does come with a USB Type-C adapter, but this is more sort of the size of a typical laptop power brick, as opposed to more of a smartphone size thing. I think, again, for the education customers, it doesn't necessarily matter that this isn't as compact as it could be, but if you were looking for a personal device, it's a little bit on the chunky side. While it's designed for use without a keyboard, I have used it pretty successfully with this Logitech keyboard, and all you got to do is go into the Bluetooth settings and pair it, and once that's done, text input becomes a lot easier. And that comes in handy if you're using things like desktop applications or Linux applications like LibreOffice. So I can write documents. The Files application is a little bit disjointed because the way that Linux runs is actually in a virtual machine. So your Linux files are actually saved in a separate area. So if you wanted to, say, download something using Chrome, edit it using LibreOffice or GIMP or another Linux-based application, you would actually have to copy it first from your, say, images or downloads folder to the Linux files folder, edit it, and then maybe copy it back. So it's a little bit of a disjointed experience, but you sort of get access to 3 different operating systems in one here. You've got Chrome OS with the full-fledged Chrome web browser, you've got support for Android applications, and you've got support for Linux applications, and that makes this a pretty versatile little machine. Now again, for the target market, it's a $329 device that's a little bit more expensive than an entry-level iPad, which sells for $299 to education customers, but it includes a pen, it includes the full Chrome web browser, and it includes support for Google Classroom tools and sort of the ease of use, ease of management, and security features that come with Chromebooks. So it's pretty attractive in that way, even if it's not the highest performance device. It's cheaper than a Surface Go, which is Microsoft's new $399 tablet, which again doesn't come with a keyboard or a pen at that price range, but it's probably going to offer a faster processor and generally stronger performance with a tablet or an operating system that's really designed more for all sorts of devices, not just tablets. Chrome OS for tablets, it definitely has a feel of a work in progress, but it's coming along, and it's something that's worth keeping an eye on, I think. The launcher application is one thing that I've noticed, that the more apps you install here, the more it becomes obvious that the best way to find them is using the search bar, because they're not necessarily arranged alphabetically or in order of installation. You do have access to the most recently used ones up here at the top, but it's a little bit finicky. Overall, I really, for the most part, enjoyed using this device. Would I spend $329 on it? I don't know. It depends. I personally am very much a keyboard guy, and if I wanted a device that I was going to use for actual work, I would prefer the ability to resize and move around the windows, not just use split screen mode, and I prefer a built-in keyboard. If I was looking for something that was a tablet-specific device, I usually prefer something a little bit smaller than 9.7 inches, something that's a little bit easier to hold in my hand. That's why I use a relatively inexpensive Amazon Fire HD 8 as my primary tablet for those purposes. But for the education market, I think there's a lot of appeal in a device like this that has access to all of Google's tools, has a relatively reasonable price tag, and has access to the full Chrome web browser, which means that any web-based educational applications that you want to use, you can use. And of course has pen input, which means that you can use it for handwriting, for drawing, for artistic applications, in addition to other things. So that's the Chromebook Tab 10. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing.